Welcome back to A Celtic State of Mind. It's the old school. I'm Paul John Dykes, and I am joined today by Kevin Graham. Kevin, it's been a long time since we did our first Acsom Bulletin or even Celtic State of Mind podcast, but it's been 29 years now since you and I first got our season tickets, and there's news today being sent out by Celtic that the season tickets have sold out. It looks as though Celtic fans are all in. We are, along with John Kennedy, the only constant at this football club. What was your memories back in the day, though? Because it wasn't fashionable to have a season ticket in the Hampden season, was it?
No, I fully bought into what Fergus McCann says. Fergus McCann says, buy your season ticket for 130 quid or whatever it was, and you'll get your seat at the rebuilt paradise. Build it and they will come, build it and they will come, as he actually says. And that was it. That was a hook, line and sinker. You knew for a couple of seasons, or at least a season, there was only going to be 26,000. That's, 30 odd thousand when you take in the main stand, but the north stand was going to get built, held 26,000, a wee corner for away fans. So you wanted to make sure that you were back. Mm-hmm. And that was it, eh? And that season at Hampden, I mean, some of my best memories, like Rudy Vata scoring against Rangers, and the 4 days before that getting absolutely battered for Partick Thistle 3-0.
Yeah.
It was a strange season.
It was, Kev. By the way, I'm going to pick up on a tiny little detail. It was 3-1 because Peter Grant scored.
3-1?
And he blessed himself. You know, a 3-1 defeat. Grant scores a consolation goal and he's on his knees blessing himself. I love Peter Grant. He's absolutely tremendous. But it was a strange season.
I was maybe in the pub at that point when he actually scored.
Pub? What age were you? I mean, you mentioned the price of the ticket. Back then, I was under 16. I got one for 95 quid. That was my first ticket. It was £95. It was Hampden. Did it put me off? Absolutely not, because it wasn't always about the fame and the glory back then and success, although success was to come. You mentioned the Rudy Vata goal. Rudy did the George Cadet before George Cadet did it. You remember when he ran away, giving it the old George Cadet? And hopefully at some point we see his son Rocco doing it likewise against Rangers. But that was the mention this morning. I've obviously been away, so I thought I'd log in quite casually to book my picture with the 3 trophies, the wee man and the missus, and that's all sold out as well. I say sold out.
I'm going at 5 o'clock tonight.
Tonight, I tried to get Friday, but every single slot throughout the entire week is gone, Kev. So I'm late to the party, I'm afraid. There was one line in the email that stood out for me. It says, Brendan and the boys look to build from a position of strength. We've got to do it, Kev. We've lost Ange. We've replaced him with Brendan. It looks like we're losing Jota. And as the headline says, a few of the other star players have been mentioned in dialogue with other clubs. I don't know about yourself, but you know, this cannot be another missed opportunity for Celtic. We've got to build on this success, haven't we?
It can't be another missed opportunity. I mean, how many missed opportunities have we had during our supporting lifetime, Paul? I mean, how many times? Right, everybody will point back to the biggest one, which was probably the Seville season, the UEFA Cup final. And why did we not kick on? The reason we never kicked on was because football changed. We had already spent 5 years' money up front. And basically, if you look at the time where O'Neill came into Celtic and when he left, in the space of 5 years, when O'Neill came into Celtic's wage bill was the same as Everton's. By the time O'Neill left Celtic, Everton's wage bill was double Celtic's. Mm-hmm. So it shows you that change in that 5 year period in the money coming in. And that's the big one, eh? And any time like you stop Wim Janssen, you go into chaos right away. Right away, Janssen leaves and Fergus McCann and the board procrastinate on who they want to appoint. We all thought it was Bobby Robson, turned out to be Josef Venglos and somebody that Jock Brown will name as well. Houli Robson and an unnamed guy that Brown will never name seemingly, and it turned out to be Josef Venglos. That season was after the World Cup, and Venglos told everybody that the guys coming back for the World Cup, they're going to be November, December by the time they're actually fully fit, and that's what it turned out to be. By that time, it was far, far too late. Mm-hmm. A position of strength as well. This is probably, look, probably the biggest missed chance of absolutely doing anything for a position of strength was 2012.
Yeah,
At
I would
that
say so.
point, and I think us as a Celtic support, or some of the Celtic support, have got to look at themselves because they deserted the club at that point because Rangers weren't there. And
My issue with
that's when you had the banners of doom.
yeah,
That's when Celtic had to actually reduce the ticket prices because the Rangers games weren't there because folk weren't buying season tickets. They were going, I'm not buying that to go and watch that rubbish. What happened to we're one club? We've got nothing to do with them. Next thing you can, you've got the banners of shame. That's what we actually called them, the banners of shame up the top tier. And that was the biggest mistake we've probably made when we've had a chance to absolutely hammer them into oblivion, and it's never happened because I'll say it, the board didn't want it to happen, and
well,
they were
this is it.
proved correct.
The fans wanted it to happen, Kev. And when we look back on it, that
Some
is
of
the
us,
moment. That is the moment.
those that disappeared and shouted for refunds, they didn't want it to happen.
Mm-hmm. You know, that was the time where Neil Lennon and Peter Lowell done on a wee whistle-stop tour around the supporters clubs, didn't they, to try and drum up more interest in the season tickets. We're in different days now. Ange Postecoglou has gone. There's a few people in the comment section talking about comments that he's been making on his Spurs interview. I'm going to be honest with you, Kev. I'm absolutely too focused on what we're doing to be watching that. Ange is gone, and I'm using this. I've nicked this. Celtic will always create new heroes, because on Friday night we had an audience with Gordon Strachan, the aforementioned Gordon Strachan, and obviously he is an unbelievable character, orator. He's a funny. He's a comedian. He is absolutely a comedian. Now, quick wee story for you, but he's meticulous in his preparation, right? Now, I've heard that from players who have played for him. Obviously, we've done a few of these events with the likes of John Hartson and Chris Sutton, for example, who worked with him. Alan Thompson worked with him. Jackie McNamara never got the opportunity to work with him because he was away, shortly after Strachan arrived. So Gordon Strachan organises a presentation, Kev, which appears on the big screen behind you. So when he's talking about, for example, his great friend, the late Tommy Burns, images appear as chosen by Gordon Strachan. And then when he's talking about Mark McGee, for example, he's got a bit of footage that he uses to get the boot stuck right into his mate Mark McGee, showing some footage of him playing for Aberdeen. The planning is unbelievable for a night like this, because as you've seen on many occasions in the past, Kev, a lot of these guests turn up, they'll answer the questions, they'll do the meet and greet, they'll do all that kind of stuff. But he had a presentation. Now, to run through that presentation, Kev, he said to me when was it? Wednesday, I think it was. I got a message. He said, Paul, there's a few wee things I want to run through with you. I'll give you a wee phone at 10 o'clock on, I think it was Wednesday morning. Now, as you know, I was in a different time zone. So I was at 4 o'clock in the morning, but it's Gordon Strachan. So I didn't want to basically say, no, Gordon, coming up. So I just agreed to it. I got up at 3.
So what you done was you just rocked to the nightclub in your all-inclusive resort.
The nightclub?
Or the Ming Ho on cocktails, and just spoke to Gordon Strachan for 5 hours.
I wish it was as cool as that,
That's what I would have done.
It was more like falling out my bed at 3:45 thinking, I've got to speak to Gordon Strachan. It was very surreal, I've got to say. So I'm standing on a balcony speaking to Gordon Strachan on the phone. But the reason I'm bringing it all up is he was asked the question about Jota. Inevitable, it was going to happen. He got asked the question about Jota, and Gordon Strachan said, we've done great business on the player. Once this goes through, and we all expect it to go through, Celtic will always create new heroes. And it's true, Kev. And I think that maybe the last couple of years, the experience of the last couple of years is kind of hardening on us to that fact. It was Ange himself speaking about don't get attached to heroes. Are you feeling a bit different about it, or had you already got to that point as a 40-odd-year-old male that you weren't really hero worshipping Celtic players now anyway? Is it something that you do as a kid? Because I've got to say, I was all in with Ange. I was gutted. I was disappointed when he left. And there's been players that I felt the same with. I'm going to be pretty gutted when Jota leaves. But I'm kind of comforted by the kind of mantra that Gordon Strachan has instilled in me now, whereby he'll leave, someone else will come in, someone else will be that hero.
I think it's different nowadays. The advent of Bosman in the early 90s changed how you should have a look at football players. I mean, the outlier, the complete and utter outlier is Henrik Larsson. And how we managed to get Henrik Larsson for 7 years, I'll never know. And probably he will be my last hero who made me cry when he left. He will be my last hero that made me cry when he left. Now, what I always say to guys is, look, I says this last Monday with James, we've got an 18 to 24 month love affair with these guys before they move on. Before they move on to somewhere else. It's like seeing a band in King Tut's, really, really loving them. Then next thing you know, 24 months later, 18 months later, they're playing the Hydro, they're playing Bella Houston Park, they're playing somewhere like that. Eh? We get them at that sweet spot. Mm-hmm. When they're on the rise, and we need to start actually appreciating that. Look what Jota gave us. Look what he actually gave us, the iconic poses and stuff like that. The guy's been offered, and the club have been offered a staggering deal. Mm-hmm. And we all speak about Brendan Rodgers not selling guys when the time was right. Time's right, because somebody's came in with an offer which we cannot really turn down. And even though it looks like we're trying to haggle, because I think Celtic want to actually go, this beats your transfer record. I think Celtic want that. I think they want something to say, this is more than 25 million. And I think that's what the delay probably is. Because Jota's, the negotiation with Jota must be brilliant. Eh? Aye, we're going to offer you £192,000 a week tax-free. Hold on, I'm just going to think about that. Just let me leave the room. It's not going to happen. I wrote a bit on the blog. We got lucky that the fact that the Saudi revolution is based on Portuguese agents. Mm. We got really, really lucky. Mm-hmm. And also the fact that Nuno Santos, who's is going to be Jota's new manager, knows him. Because Jota is not the profile of player that's been going to Saudi Arabia over the last 4 or 5 weeks. So we've got extremely lucky at this. But we've also got, it could also work another way as well. Because if we say it's our 25 million, folk come in for Hatate and Kyogo go, that's your starting figure now.
We spoke about it a few weeks ago, Kev. Remember when I think it was the Kyogo rumour, the £16 million rumour around Kyogo. And I was saying at the time, and what was I basing it on? I was basing it on the fact that I think we'd attained that level of, there's our star player, there's the age group that he's in, and that's what we're looking for. And of course, you need the interest from these leagues that are willing to pay it. You know, the EPL. And at this moment in time, in Saudi Arabia are throwing the money in as well. I mean, if they can outbid the EPL, then obviously you've got two that will be able to outbid each other, hopefully. And my point at that time, and I think actually, now that I think of it, I was commenting rather than being on the show, but you might have been on it. And I was saying 20 to 25, that should be the ballpark for our top players. And like you say, you're setting a bar there. Now, there's only a couple of leagues who would be prepared to pay that kind of money. We get that. But obviously there has been interest in the other two as well. But I totally agree with you. We bring in Jota, and I'm going to come to this in a moment or two, because there's been this kind of clamour around bringing in marquee players this summer, Kevin. Listen, we've all seen that lengthy WhatsApp rumour that's doing the rounds, right? We've all seen it. And there's been this clamour around bringing in marquee players. My question would be this. I don't know, obviously, what Brendan Rodgers' thoughts are on who he's going to be bringing in. But when you go back to, and I'm talking when we brought Jota and Carter Vickers in as loan players, they weren't marquee signings, Kev. What you were bringing in at that point, and Carter Vickers was a nomadic centre-half who had half a dozen loan deals and never settled anywhere. So we brought him in. He was a last-minute loan deal on the last day of the summer transfer window. Jota had been something of a busted flush. He'd been one of these prodigious talents coming through all the different age groups of Portuguese football, but it hadn't really materialised the way that Benfica thought it would for him. And we brought him in on a lot of promise, on a bit of a wing and a prayer. Yes, when we signed them as permanent transfers a year later, they felt almost like marquee signings because we knew how good they were at that point. But what I'm trying to say is, if we bring in a couple of guys, I mean, had you heard of Jota, Kev, if you're going to be honest, when we brought him in on loan? I hadn't heard of him. Carter Vickers, yes, in dispatches, but not to the point where I thought we were bringing in a top quality player at that stage, right? He turned out to be a top quality player. So if we can still bring in players who might not be deemed marquee, but will turn out to be marquee players.
Aye, I mean, it's quite, when you keep on saying Marquee, I keep on picturing the Marquee Smith interview when they were asking about the England football team. And they said, he says, get rid of all the Premiership players. Play the right back for Bradford, because he'll want to die in the trenches for England. All these millionaire footballers, weren't they? So anytime I hear somebody say Marquee, I'm thinking, lower league football players playing international football. Look, like it or lump it, there's two type of player that's going to come to Scotland. One, it's in the retirement. When fancies coming up here to win some trophies. Or two, they're going to be young and they see it as a step up. And it's as a gateway to somewhere else. And then there's also probably a third, somebody that's a busted flush and needs to come and kind of regain their career. Joe Hart, but then Joe Hart falls into the first category as well. So that's the type of player that we're going to get coming to Scotland. You look at the names that we've been linked with; they're all in a similar age. They're all on a rise. They've all played less than 100 games for their clubs. That's the days of you're getting your Bellamy's and your Robbie Keanes and your top Premiership guys for me is gone. I don't think Celtic will operate in that market now because they've done it and it's failed. And you only have to look at my second favourite Welshman, Aaron Ramsey's trip over Govan to say marquee signings didn't actually, big signings, big tent signings didn't actually work. It's Scottish football. We've got to remember what we're trying to, and you're asking a guy to come and play against Motherwell away on a Wednesday night. I mean, we've been linked to a guy for Switzerland.
Yeah.
If we go head to head with Leipzig, right? Unless we actually sell him the project Celtic, he'll end up at Leipzig because you'll just look at that better league, better this, better that. It's brilliant that we're trying to get him. If we are trying to get him according to the rumour and all of that, but will he see coming to Celtic as a step up? Will he has to be sold Celtic as a step up, as the next natural progression for him. And that's a problem that we've got with the league that we're in. So the guys that we are, anybody that's expecting us to go and sign like big Premiership names, they're barking up the wrong tree. It'll be guys between 19 and 23 who have got something to prove, and they'll see Celtic as the next logical place for their progression under a manager who is known to develop young players. Yeah. And that's a big thing. That is a massive thing. You look at what Rodgers did do with that Leicester side, a very, very young Leicester side. That's how he was perfect for the Leicester project, because they were a young side. They kept together too long. Same mistake that he made at Celtic. He didn't sell when the time was right.
Yeah.
So it's these guys are coming in and they're going to go, oh, Brendan Rodgers, there's a guy with a track record of developing players. I'm going to go there. And Rodgers is a massive seller point, no matter, like me, that you were a wee bit unsure about him coming back. But he's back now. I tried to watch him playing golf with tubes last night and couldn't do it, mainly because it was golf. I just couldn't. I'm going to need to watch it on the telly and forward the golf bits, and just so they can get to the chatting bits. But I'm not really interested in Brendan Rodgers' reverse swing and sand wedge game.
Is that basically them looking at a different angle of how to do the interview? So
yes,
you get the sit down interviews, which obviously they've been tried and tested for years, Kev. And as you know, I sit and watch them through the ages on YouTube because it intrigues me, the great interviewers out there. And then they tried to mix it up a bit with regards to the hot ones with the spicy wings and, you know, the carpool and all that kind of stuff, driving about in a motor. They're always trying to add another angle to doing the interview. Is that what Tubes does? He takes them for a round of golf. All right, I get it.
Golf, but it's no like St Andrews. They were in Mallorca playing golf.
Of course,
so it's lovely.
I'm guessing Brendan's got about 40 properties over there. You mentioned about Brendan Rodgers being able to develop players, and Home has already spoken about being starstruck with him. That's what he's going to do to that category of player. Is there a third category, Kev, that perhaps we're not tapping into? And that third category being the best of young Scottish talent. And the reason I'm bringing that up, obviously there's chat around David Turnbull's future. He was one of the finest, if not the finest, Scottish players in the game, in our game, when we signed him. There's a lot of players linked and have gone to other leagues, notably Italy. I know we were in for Hickey. People criticise Celtic for not signing Hickey. We tried to sign him. We were not prepared to match the wages that he was going to be getting over in Bologna, I believe, at that time. But is there an argument to say there is a third category, or are you now satisfied that third category hasn't really worked for Celtic? Because when we bring in recently the younger player from Scotland, it doesn't seem as though they can stake a claim long term.
No, and I think younger guys are maybe now looking at this because guys like Robertson, Tierney, Hickey have opened up the world for them. They're looking beyond Celtic and Rangers.
And fair play to Henderson, by the way. Liam Henderson was a bit of a trailblazer, wasn't he?
Aye, they're now looking beyond these shores. And my argument for this is they're all shouting about Lewis Ferguson. I've watched quite a bit of Italian football. And the Lewis Ferguson that's playing in Italy is not the Lewis Ferguson that was playing at Aberdeen. He's completely developed as a player. Would he have got that development at Celtic? Well, you look at the bodies in front of him, probably not. And that's the problem I think we've got when, yes, you can judge a Scottish player, but then you have to go, can we create a European level player from that player? And is he going to get enough game time to actually do it? And the answer is usually no. I mean, I find it really, really interesting that if you've seen that WhatsApp rumour and all of that we're linked with a left back, and you're going, Greg Taylor's done an all right job for us.
Mm-hmm.
And like another one, it came within that. I think it's a market where we haven't had much success. Turnbull was a slight success, but as soon as there was better players put in front of him, that was it. He was, and Postecoglou, I can't call him Angelos Postecoglou, used him until he run him into the ground. Then eventually got Hatate, got O'Reilly, and he was out the picture even when he became back fit. I think it's a market. My feelings on Scottish game, I think the Scottish game is probably in the worst nick and it's been for a wee while. You look at the amount of talent that's leaving at 16 to go elsewhere, even for us. Mm-hmm. Even for us, because there's no progression. These big clubs are now coming in, and I think you'll see more and more Scottish players developing. And I think maybe you should be looking at these boys after they've went somewhere else and developed, because they're not going to get that developed. The Aaron Hickey that's playing for Brentford in Scotland now is no the Aaron Hickey at Left Hearts. And that's what we've got to understand. Yes. That player you're seeing now, wouldn't he be that player if he had came to, well, we didn't ken if he would be that player if he came to Celtic. He might have been a better player if he came to Celtic. But the player that you're actually watching is no the player that left that club. And that's what we've always got to keep in mind. Sometimes you maybe need to let these guys go and go, right, somebody's paid £4 million for you. On you go and let's see. And if we're going to be in the higher end market, then look to try and get them back once they've actually put up. By the way, you can do it at that level. But somebody for Hibs doing it against Motherwell shouldn't really come into our equation. I'm sorry if that sounds absolutely big and arrogant.
It's not, Kev, because I remember the conversation I had when I was doing my Quality Street Gang book, and I spoke about the fact, and some people listening might not know this, but Graham Souness was one of the young guys that was coming and training at Celtic Park on a Tuesday and a Thursday night, alongside the likes of Kenny Dalglish and Danny McGrain and all those great players that went on to be known as the Quality Street Gang. And I found that out just by speaking to the guys who were there, and obviously you then verify it. By the time I get to Kenny Dalglish, I'm speaking to Dalglish about the fact that obviously the soonest that he played with at Liverpool, what a player he'd have been at Celtic. And he said exactly what you've just said there. He said, no, football doesn't work like that. Graham Souness had to get the knockback from, well, not the knockback, but Celtic didn't sign him. He then went down to Spurs. He had a disappointing time at Spurs. He had to go and find himself at Middlesbrough before he became that player that played for Liverpool. So he had to go away and build his character and build his skill set before, you know, you're then looking at him thinking, what a player. It's not as though you can pick that player for Liverpool and he would have been the guy we would have got. By the way, the thought of him in the hoops is not a very pleasant one, incidentally. So sorry for using that example, but it's a kind of similar thing that you were saying there, Kev. I'm going to come to that top you're wearing, by the way. Jungle Lion. Celtic supporters will hold back now for the foreseeable future with loving players and management. Last few seasons has burned a lot of people. I totally get what he means here, Kev. I really do. I mean, I think back to like the campaign we spoke about, our first season ticket. We didn't know each other back then. Season 94-95. I was the same as yourself. Fergus McCann sold me the dream. I remember Celtic having a season ticket advert at half-time during the World Cup final in 1994. You know, Fergus McCann came over having had involvement in Canadian sports. He knew how to sell stadiums out. He knew how stadiums should look. And he had an incredible kind of foresight into what now has been normalised, and that was the selling of the season ticket. Jim Orr provided me with some figures a wee while ago about the season ticket fan base that we had. And you know, a lot of the time we had 6,000 season ticket holders, Kev, through the 80s, for example, where we were a right good side, and then it just wasn't the done thing. You would rock up, you would pay in, you'd get carried over, however you got into the stadium. But back then it was a completely different world, and the world that we're now operating in, that might be the next development. We don't have heroes. That's a bit sad though, Kev, because that's what falling in love with football is all about, is it not?
I understand what Jungle Lion's actually saying there, but I will disagree with it, because you've already seen the excitement that we've got for Tulio. We've already seen the excitement that we've got for Odin coming in. We will love these guys. We will, like, when they score, as soon as they score, the love is there. As soon as they score a winning goal, the love's going to be there. Next thing you can, we'll be talking them about, oh, they're the next big thing, this and that. That's a football fan's mentality, because it's a fantasy world at times. It is. It's a wee step away from reality. And we will fall in love with players again, but I don't think we'll be as hurt when they leave, because we now understand that is what's going to happen. I think for me, when I got it into my head, is they're only going to be here for 18, 24 months. We're not going to get a Henrik again. We're not going to get guys. I mean, I think I was more distraught when Brian McClare left, because that was in my time watching Celtic in the early 80s, that was very, very unusual that a guy was only here 4 years. They meant, I'm away to Man United. Mm-hmm. Dalglish, I'm sure guys will go further back with Dalglish and
Charlie,
that as well.
I think Charlie had that impact after Dalglish. Yep.
So it's if these guys develop well within that 18, 24 month period, they're gone. They are gone, and that is just where we are. What you've got to hope that you get a clutch of them during that 18, 24 month period that hit it off in Europe.
And that's possible. That is absolutely possible.
That's what you've got to hope.
Now, looking back, obviously 29 years to our first seasons as season ticket holders, Kev, not as long ago as that was you and I reacting to Brendan Rodgers leaving the club. And the reason I'm bringing that up is recently I thought to myself, isn't it interesting when people say, but you said this, or you said this was going to happen, or you didn't like that player and he turned out to be brilliant. And I thought, wouldn't it be interesting to go back to that podcast you and I did a day or two after Brendan Rodgers left, because I'd never listened to it since obviously it happened. And so I put that up on the audio platform recently, Kevin, and in doing so, listened through big sections of it. I don't know if you got an opportunity to listen to it, Kev, but it was a very interesting take that you and I had on the departing Brendan Rodgers and the temporary gaffer Neil Lennon. Can you remember your thoughts back then?
I'm sure my thoughts were probably, I was glad that Neil Lennon was coming in to steady the ship, then he was available to steady the ship, that he shouldn't be long term. And I was surprised that I was probably a bit emotional at that time, and I probably called Rodgers quite a lot of things under the sun. But Paul, I could walk out of here and go to the kitchen and change my mind what I'm going into the kitchen for.
And
so,
that's all right.
So I'm not actually that.
Have you ever gone to the kitchen yet and put the remote control in the fridge or something? Have you started doing that yet? Aye, that's a bit worrying.
Aye. And I reserve the right to change my mind on a 10-second basis. So I'm not really interested if somebody comes back to me and goes, you say that. I went, well, I've changed my mind. I'm allowed to.
Can it be fair?
If you become stubborn, then you're just no worth it. You've got to be able to take things as they come because you've got no control over them.
The thing is, we've not been on the
psychology again.
Yeah, but we've not been on the bulletin long enough because I've just said Ken. We've not been on the bulletin regularly enough because obviously, in speaking to you, Kev, I'm just falling into these old habits. But with regards to what you said, yes, that's exactly what you said. But what you also said, which I found really interesting, you didn't really give Brendan Rodgers much of a hard time, I've got to say. But what you did say, and I think that was maybe because Alan McInally had already given me the heads up.
Was going to happen,
a month before it happened. But what you did say is that if Neil Lennon wins the treble, which he went on to do, obviously we'd already had the League Cup in the bag, you said you fully expected Peter Lawwell to give him the job full time. You did. You said it, and it happened.
Right.
Yes, you said it, and it happened.
Money on it.
To be fair, I thought it was I thought it was quite a balanced reaction pod. Of course, it wasn't one of the kind of live stream reactions that we do now. We'd had time to think about it. It was recorded and then we put it out. And here we are, 4 years later, welcoming Brendan Rodgers back. I found his press conference very interesting. And of course, there has been legacy signings. There's been players that our recruitment team have been tracking, and he seemed pretty happy with the ones that we were bringing in. Whilst it's fresh in my memory, I've got to say, on Friday night, Kevin, the venue was jam-packed. It was a complete sellout. It was actually, I think, 5 over the 350. It was 355 in the room. And it was a great atmosphere. It was a fantastic atmosphere. And I was talking to Celtic fans who watch A Celtic State of Mind from all over the place. And I think from the furthest afield was John in Canada, who watches us over in Canada. He was over for a couple of weeks visiting family, and he saw it as an opportunity to come along and watch a Celtic State of Mind live in action with Gordon Strachan. Had a right good chat with him, so a big shout out to you, John, and everybody else who came along. These nights are fantastic, and our next one is with Roy Aitken. I'm going to talk about that a wee bit later on. Before I do it, let's bring up some comments. Ewan Boy Martin, hail troops from a hot and sunny Mallorca. What is it with Mallorca? I've never been
in a couple of weeks.
Are you? Oh dear me, that's obviously the place to be. You enjoy yourself, Ewan Boy. Is that where you're off to? Right.
I'm late to Santa Pons, aye.
Paul McLean. I'll need to get that in the diary. Get somebody to sit in for you on a Monday. By the way, how good was James when I was away? How fantastic was James McKenzie? He was brilliant, wasn't he?
Related to me, eh? He wouldn't ken with that talent. He is related to me, That's.
But, listen, I wasn't going to say that, but yes, he is. He is related to Kevin Graham. Paul McLean. I think this is going to be an exciting close season. Got a real good feeling about the calibre of player coming in. Yeah, absolutely, Paul. But one thing I would say is that how much did you know about Virgil van Dijk when he came in? How much did you know about Jota when he came in? These players can become the heroes that, like you say, Kev, how often does it happen where we buy a player who's a ready-made, kind of fully flourished hero already, and it doesn't work out? That can happen. The Urban Culture, Jungle Line, things changed big time for me in the last few weeks. Only constant is the supporters, and then in brackets, and John Kennedy as well. We had a wee chat actually with Gordon Strachan about his laddie obviously being at Celtic Park, and we spoke about the pressures and how it makes you feel and all this kind of stuff with regards to the stick that Gavin got, obviously with everybody else, Kev, during that dreadful dark season, the COVID years. And Gordon obviously just laughed at him. and said, he's just got to deal with it. He's never had it as bad as me. So, he doesn't get any sympathy whatsoever from him. You and Boy Martin, we have to accept now as fans that players nowadays, like you said, Kev, might only have a 2-year span and then move on for big fees. This is the Ajax model, and we are finally getting it right. And again, looking at the interview footage that we've had from Brendan, nothing's going to be a surprise to him, Kev. He's prepared for what's happening right now, isn't he?
The club would... The Jota bid was probably a surprise because they didn't expect... I mean, he put that 25 million clause in the contract for the 10 grand a week wages. If that is true, they didn't actually expect to get that. And they didn't probably expect Jota to get interest this summer. But I'm sure they probably knew there was interest in Lila Bada, whose agent was probably making noises to say, well, what's out there for Lille? And as you say, Rodgers will know. And the club will know which players are getting interest, what players are interested in coming, who he's going to need to have a wee conversation with today. I mean, he's going to need, or by the end of this week, there's going to be, he'll talk to everybody on a one-to-one basis. He will have text him, he's maybe phoned a couple of the more senior players and that, but today he'll be looking at these guys and going, right, you're going to come into my office for a wee one-to-one. Let's sit down. Obviously, after his big presentation, because he's got to have a PowerPoint presentation.
A bit like V. Gordon.
Aye, he's got to have that this afternoon, which is not a bad thing, by the way. It happens all the time, and it's just, we seem to be poking fun at it because it's highly unusual in Scotland. I'm sure there's plenty of other managers of PowerPoint presentations as well. Brian McClare only because he can't work a PowerPoint, and he told the SFA to ram it when they asked him to work a PowerPoint. So that's chalky.
Exactly.
So it'll be an interesting conversation with Lila Bada, as I says on the blog. The reason being, he's now the man with that right hand, the right winger's jersey. So his view may have changed. He'll know what's out there as well. So he'll know what clubs are interested in him, and he might go, I'm better hanging about here for another year, taking this shot.
That's a little bit unkind, that. Anyway.
A little bit unkind. Aye.
But we like the crack.
Aye. He might be like looking at this now going, well, my circumstances have now changed. The manager's left. The boy in front of me is now left. The club's out there. I didn't really fancy going there. And even though his agent will be trying his best, doing what agents do, trying to punt him, he might be going like that. Nah, wait a minute, I'm going to stay here another year. My value's not going to drop that drastically in another year. Actually, my value could actually go up in the next year. So it'll be an interesting conversation with Brendan Rodgers is going to have with him. Will Rodgers have made a decision on the guys coming back for loan? Probably not, but he's probably got a fair idea of what the rest of the coaching staff think.
Yeah.
And he will have the data of their loan spells where they've ever been, wherever they've been. So he will know that, but he's not going to tell a boy the day or in the first week, by the way, you're not in my plans. Even though he might have a fair idea what is actually going to happen. We can't write anybody off at this point because everything that we thought was going to happen at the end of the season is now up in there. And even some of the players will be thinking that. Some of the players will be going, I could move away here. We'll be thinking, going, I've got at least 2 or 3 weeks here to try and see what the lay of the land is. I'm going to knock my pan in for 2 or 3 weeks and see what's going to happen. But some of them might be going, I just want out of here. I've had enough.
See the thing with that, Kevin, right? And yes, when Ange Postecoglou left, it was quite unsettling because we were going back to the very first point we made, Kev, around building on success. Straight away you start thinking, right, it's getting stripped away here, the gaffer's away. You start thinking to yourself, how's that going to affect the players that he sold the club to? And you know, the main ones in that regard, I would suggest, are those that came over from Japan, because obviously he was the man in Japan. He had his ear to the ground in that particular market. He sold that dream to them, and you start getting concerned. But at the same time, I think it's good to have that reset. It's good to have that refresh, because like what you just said there, there's going to be players who might have been moving into what you would call a comfort zone because they know how much the gaffer rates him or regards him. He's played a lot of games for a particular manager, Kev. All of a sudden, that's all torn up. Somebody else comes in. So in that respect, I think it's a good thing that we're going to get the refresh. This time in Ange Postecoglou's Celtic tenure was an interesting one, in that we didn't get enough new players in the door quickly enough. Obviously, there was an issue at that time with going from Peter Lovell to Don Mackay to Michael Nicholson. There was definitely issues with signing players, and spoke about it in a few press conferences. But he was able to unearth some players that hitherto that his arrival we had kind of written off, and in particular one of them was Tony Ralston. Do you see anybody in that Celtic squad who you and I as Celtic fans might have written off, but Ange can get a tune out of?
Ange can get a tune out of, didn't it, Tottenham?
No, no, don't say that. Seriously, that was a slip of the tongue.
That was a slip of the tongue, eh?
Brendan can get a tune out of.
Point it out before the comments pointed it out.
Exactly.
I think the ones coming back, everybody's going to have a wee look at Mikey Johnson, because Mikey Johnson was Brendan Rodgers' previous pet project and brought him into the team and all of that. But Adam Montgomery, I think Montgomery could fit on the left-hand side of the midfield three if he plays his usual 4-2-3-1. Can I see him being a left back? But I can see him moving up one, because he's got a KT-ness to him, I think. And there's something there. And if he shows up well in training over the next couple of weeks, it wouldn't surprise me to see him overtaking Bernabe. And then again, we've got Bernabe. Bernabe could now settled Argentinian young lad, had a tough year. He might benefit from the change of manager, slight change of style, how to play fullback. But Adam Montgomery, I think he can play anywhere up that left-hand side. And I think he could maybe one that makes that breakthrough. The rest of them, you look at what we've got there, Liam Scales, I don't think he really impressed too much at Aberdeen. The two lads that we got for Sheffield Wednesday, I think they're in the wrong film.
Mm-hmm.
They turned up for an audition to Coronation
Remember,
Street.
Urugide followed us on Twitter.
He did, aye.
Followed a Celtic State of Mind for one day and then unfollowed us. Don't know why. Well, we're giving him a hard time that day. I don't know. He's a YouTuber after all.
There is guys there. I can't see where Luke Shaw and Urugide fit in, but I can see a space for Montgomery because he's young enough.
You're always calling him Luke Shaw, by the way. It's Liam Shaw.
Liam Shaw. It's a slip of the tongue, man. That is Luke Shaw. Aye.
I was going to let it go, mate, but you pulled me up for Spurs.
No. It's fine. It's fine. It's Luke Shaw's left Man United, has he not? He's going to leave Man United, and he will probably rebound about get his £175,000 a week for Aston Villa or somewhere like that.
It's incredible. Yeah, the other Man U player that obviously was a part of the strange WhatsApp rumours was Scott McTominay. And the one thing that stood out for me was the fact he was on that list. Remember the list that was binned and then pulled out the bin by a cleaner who was later sacked? He was on that list, Scott McTominay. Brendan Monaghan, hail guys from Ireland. Always great to hear from you, Brendan. I hope you're doing well. Anybody out there who wants to check him out, you can check out Brendan's socials for his music as well. And Double Denim. We're still in love with Jota, aren't we? Watch Tilio's highlights. And Marco is coming in as a Marco. Is he going to drop the O? Highlights video. Boy looks a player. And yes, I know that's the point of a highlights video. Kev, even though most people could compile a highlights video and make themselves look all right, you might be struggling with your football career. Am I right?
Aye. I reckon you could get a good 30 seconds.
That's the warm-up. That's the warm-up. There's some kind of record that you had been a sub more than anybody else in Scottish football history. Is that right?
Well, I'm saying I was the greatest unused sub in Scottish welfare football history. I've kind of worked it out, and now my maths is no my strongest suit. But I reckon I was an unused sub at least 178 times.
So did you usually just carry the hampers or the wee bottle bags or the bag of balls?
me and another guy used to get to pick the tracksuits because that's what we're going to be.
Because you'd
But
be
I turned
wearing
up
them.
because I turned up every week.
You need that. You need that in a football team. You're now basically the James Forrest of
I'm the water
Celtic.
boy, yeah.
Yes, good pace, can score, and great close control. We are going to be speaking about Tilio because, you know what, at Acsom, we are going to still get excited about new signings. I don't think there's anything wrong with that whatsoever. But Kev, before we move on, we've finally got the photo shoot, the behind-the-scenes video, the video promo of the new kit. You're sitting there with a much maligned football jersey. Some people, I certainly look at a football jersey and I think to myself, who does it remind me of? And you know the first person that springs to mind when I look at that jersey, Kev? JP Mason. JP Mason was wearing that the first time we met him in Stirling. You remember that?
Yes.
And he wore it well. He wore it well. But in terms of a player, who does it remind you of, that design that you are currently sporting?
It reminds me of Cascarino at Broomfield.
Oh, is that when he ended the police officer's career?
Aye.
Mm-hmm. He scored one of his 4 goals that day, didn't he?
Yes. I was there that day.
In the rain.
Airdrie wasn't a nice place to go to, but it reminds me of Cascarino for some utter bizarre reason. I don't know why. I've never tried to, layer that down. I've never tried to unpick those layers why it reminds me of Cascarino. I just let it ride.
It just happens. I'm going to go for Stevie Fulton. It reminds me of Stevie Fulton. One time called Baggio by Billy McNeil. The reason we're talking about your jersey, Kev, that's an original, isn't it?
Yes.
It's not one of your remakes. It's got the furry badge that had the sandpaper on your nipple on the back side of it.
Mm-hmm. Furry badge. People's. It was at his mines. I still managed to fit into it 30 years later. It must have been like a tent on me during back in the day, right enough.
Fair play. Now, the reason I'm bringing it up, right, is because back in those days, it's not with hindsight, that was a controversial jersey. Not only because it's a bit of a zany design, but that was Umbro in the 90s. You just have to look at some of the infamous jerseys that they released around about that time. But the fact that the People's Ford appeared in red, white and blue on the sponsor. And obviously, in doing the research for the book, I had to track down the person who was responsible for that sponsorship deal. It was a gentleman called Brian Gilder, who had been sponsoring Celtic for many, many years in the matchday programme, for example, Kevin, on the billboards run about the stadium at Celtic Park. And he was approached by Terry Cassidy, who wanted People's Ford to sponsor the jersey for 1 year because Terry Cassidy had fallen out with, what was his name? Jerry Eady? Was it Jerry Eady? Gerard Eady of C.R. Smith, yeah? Fifer.
Jerry Wisefield was what every woman wants. It was Eady. I sometimes get the two confused.
And you're showing your age. You're showing your age because it became what everyone wants. But you called it what every woman wants. So they are. And did you ever see on the logo? Here's a wee fun fact for you. On the what every woman wants logo or what everyone wants logo, the W was very strangely, there was a wee swirl. Did you notice that? If you look closely, it's GW, Jerry Wisefield. There you go. Now, Jerry Eady and Terry Cassidy fell out. I think Terry Cassidy was quite easy to fall out with. But I spoke to Brian Gilder and he told me that he was shown a number of designs. These are the things, Kev, that I'd love to have access to. He was shown a number of designs for the home jersey and for the away jersey, and they'd mocked them up with his logo on it. And I think Brian at the time had said to him that it had to be, the Ford logo couldn't be changed. It had to be blue. There's nothing you could do with that. And Terry Cassidy didn't have an issue with that. And they went along with it. But obviously there was more than one design, and they've gone for that crazy design that you currently wear. At some point, someone at the club has okayed that, which seemed bizarre, and we know that someone was Terry Cassidy. This time around, it's the home jersey, and it's causing a wee bit of friction. I've heard loads of negative. Some people would call it negative. I've heard a lot of feedback where people just don't like it, Kev. They just don't like it. I personally think that it would have got away with the addition of the black stripes and the black Adidas logo. I think you'd have got away with that, and the black collar, of course. had the hoops been clean hoops. But they've messed up with the hoops. The hoops are shambolic. They're trying to sell it as a throwback, in their words, to the original Celtic Park entrance. We obviously know that's not the original Celtic Park entrance. Brendan Sweeney was quick to point that out last night on Twitter, I think. He mentioned that the stand was built in 1929, and that was when that, the stained glass window appeared at the front door. I'm just not getting it at all, Kev. I don't like it. I think the hoops are tarnished. You shouldn't desecrate the hoops like that. What's your take on it?
You ken what I'm going to say.
You like it.
You knew I was going to say that.
You like it. I
like it. And it actually really kicked me up the butt. I'm going to lose a couple of pounds and I'm going to buy it. Because it's got me right back into wanting football tops again.
But football tops have become trendy again, Kev. I remember, back in the 90s, right, when Oasis appeared wearing the Man City kits. Remember the photo shoot? Mm-hmm. Who did that? Was it Kevin Cummings? I think maybe they'd done this.
Kevin Cummings had done that one, aye.
For the NME or the Melody Maker. And Man City were not cool, Kev. That's what made that photo shoot so cool. They were not a hip football team. And the best up-and-coming band in Britain at that time were wearing the Man City home and away jerseys, unashamedly, nailing their colours to the mast, but wearing your football kits. And I know you go further back. You go to World in Motion. You go to 1990 when New Order done the song for England and all that. Absolutely. And it was about making football cool. But wearing football jerseys now, I think football clubs are looking at the brand, they're looking at them as fashion accessories as much as the football jersey, and I totally get it. But for me, that is just, and listen, I know that you've got to get out of the traditionalist way of thinking, but green and white hoops, the argument I don't buy is that, it must be really, really difficult to bring out a new strip every year. No, it's not, because Adidas only have to do 4 or 5 of them, just like Nike only had to do 4 or 5, New Balance only had to do, Umbro had to do a fair amount of green and white hoop jerseys, and you could see them running out of ideas eventually. But if they're struggling for ideas, Kev, go back to a classic, recreate a classic, reimagine a classic. That's what I would suggest. The reason I'm bringing it up is because I think the only way forward is to get fans involved in the planning and design process, even if it is Adidas presenting a dozen designs and having some kind of group. You've been involved in something like that before with New Balance, haven't you?
Yes, it was like only time that I've ever sort of been involved, the only time that I know of anybody ever been invited to something like that. I think they do it amongst the staff now. I think there's some sort of vetting procedure, maybe amongst the commercial staff or something like that when they have a look at the designs, because I think that's why a lot of the designs are leaked, and they're deliberately leaked for people to actually see what the reaction that they are going to get. I was involved in a New Balance one, and as you say, they go back to the classic kits and all of that, and they realise that they can't really do much they can't change the hoops too much because of the reaction that we've seen over the last couple of days. My take on it is this: it's for one season. It's for one season. If you look at the Juve tops over the last couple of years, I think we might have guessed this was coming. Now, you might have guessed that they were going to have some absolutely wild take on a hoop or a stripe, because you've actually seen it previously. With that New Balance one, I think one of the strangest things ever was that they were going to get they were thinking about a navy blue away kit and a brune away kit, and something that was really, that was a third top, because what their idea was, the third top is basically a gimmick, and it is a gimmick. Mm-hmm. And they were thinking about, well, we're a Scottish side, so we can have a navy blue top or a maroon. The other one was maroon. I was sitting there, I nearly walked out the room at that point. I nearly threw my rattle right out the pram at that point. But no, you can't do that. I didn't mind it being pink, and it ended up being pink that season, by the way. And I ended up, but they says it was the colour of the Lisbon ticket.
Oh yes, it was a tenuous link to Lisbon.
It was very, very tenuous. I didn't mind it being a luminous yellow. I didn't mind it being pink, but you can't go with any other colours that can be linked to any other Scottish football team. I went, that is not on. You can't do that.
Especially those two colours and those two football
Especially they
teams.
two colours. And I can't remember the reasoning for maroon. There was a reasoning for it. The navy blue was definitely Scotland.
Was that not the colour of Neely Mockin's sponge at Lisbon or something? It was a
Who
kind of
knows?
maroon colour.
I can't remember. I cannot remember. What they were also talking about as well, that Celtic never had a right colour green. When you looked at the stadium, it was all different colours of green.
Right.
And eventually, when you look at Celtic Park now, it's all the same shade of green.
Mm-hmm.
You look at what Adidas have done, right? I was in the Adidas outlet store yesterday at Sterling Mills. For those who are old enough, they'll just see Dougie Donnelly, as you mentioned, Sterling Mills. And the top that we wore this is the third season of New Balance, of Adidas.
Adidas, yeah, the first season was COVID. So this will be the fourth.
Right, so you had the yellow rim, you had the top of the yellow rim.
Yes.
Then you had the one that was based on the 1985 Cup final jersey.
It had the wee pinstripe. Yep.
It had the wee pinstripe. So that top was for sale in the Adidas outlet store yesterday. Still at £35. That top is now 2 years old.
Holding its value.
Well, they're saying it's holding its value. Is it holding its value? And last season's top is probably a throwback to somewhere in the early 90s, which was hated when it came out as well. Then folks saw it and went,
yeah, with the silver, you're right,
that
silver
actually
stripes.
looks better on. And I think this one will be the same. When I sat down to do this with you, you went, that absolutely looks classic now. I'll tell you, in 30 years' time, there'll be folk wearing this season's same kit.
Right.
Well,
My only concern...
Also, as well, remember the Martin O'Neill first season when they broke the
Absolutely.
hoops?
Yes.
No, you look at that. That's a classic kit. Yeah. If they remade that, folk would buy it.
I remember.
So it's for 1 year. It is for 1 year. 2
points, Kev. I totally get your point there, because obviously I'm trying my hardest to turn the silver and pink kit into a cult iconic kit, and nobody's buying it. The other thing is, Tom Boyd says to me that, because he's done the foreword for the Celtic Jersey book, about the controversy around breaking the hoops by having the two panels underneath the arms. He says no one cared when we were lifting trophies at the end of the season. I get that. But the other thing that concerns me a wee bit, there's a prototype jersey in the book for anybody who's never flicked through it at the shop, and it's a Gola jersey. Now, Gola were in discussions with Celtic when Terry Cassidy was falling out with everybody at Umbro, probably, about taking over the deal to manufacture the Celtic kits in the early 90s. They presented Celtic with a few different designs. One of them actually was a kind of fuzzy green and white hoop, Kev, which you might have seen the photos. They appeared on Twitter recently. The other one was doing away entirely with the hoops. Now, when we were with Nike done away with Barcelona's stripes, if you'll remember the controversy around that. And there was talk around them doing away with Celtic's hoops. My concern is you allow these companies to change things too much and tweak things too much. They might come up with some kind of idea and justification for not doing the hoops for a season. That, for me, is sacrilege. You can't do that.
No,
you cannot do that.
That is a step too far. That is... Look what they've tried to say this. Oh, it's the stained glass window. The first time I saw it in the dodgy pictures that were leaked on YouTube, it just reminded me of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. And then I says to my dad, before I had read all the blurb, I says to my dad, I went, they'll try and sell that as a stained glass window.
Yeah, I was thinking Jimmy Nail, crocodile shoes.
They will try and sell that as a stained glass window.
By the way, Kev, can I just interject for a moment? Because you were part of the interview, I believe. Margot McQuaig, remember we spoke to Margot?
Yes.
And Margot had been working in the stadium when they found the stained glass window that had been discarded behind a wall in the stadium. So it's great that we're celebrating the history of the club. I love that. I love it. I think it's a phenomenal piece of art almost, actually, and it's been reinstalled at Celtic Park, but it was hidden away. It was behind a fake wall. Nobody even knew it was there. They were pulling away a wall or something. They do a doorway and, what's this? They pull it out and it's the stained glass. So great that we're embracing history.
You look at that, right? If we go back to the toll booth days when we done the interviews in the toll booth, you've got that story for Margot about, then you've had the story from Tom Grant, that when they were knocking down the jungle, they found a storeroom with all league flags in it. The 9 in a row league flags were in the storeroom behind all this mess, and there was a whole load of other memorabilia sitting there that the workers were going to throw into a skip. Then you've got, what was his name? Smarmy guy. Chris White.
Chris White,
Is it Chris White was moving into an office and he threw away all the Celtic Views photographs.
They all ended up in a skip. Yeah.
They all ended up in a skip.
30
So
years
this
worth
shows,
of images. Yeah.
and that, I mean, you think that doesn't happen. Our club left its banner at Celtic Park, and that got lost, and it was found in a cupboard. We've now got it back. We put it out for Scott Brown's last game, and we had a bit of
Oh, that was the
change.
big Tommy Gemmell flag.
The big Tommy Gemmell flag, and we only recently got that back because it was found again.
Wow. You see
It
the old
disappeared.
pictures of them in rooms, Kev, and there's beautiful pennants behind them. You think, whatever happened to that pennant? Because you never see it around about the stadium. And you hope that it is somewhere stored away.
Somewhere.
Yeah.
It'll be sitting in a cupboard. That's how we need a museum. That's
Yes,
how
we do.
need. That's how all this stuff should be preserved. No, for when we're actually read. I'm sure if they ever do up the main stand, they'll probably find. Oh, what's that doing there?
What's Stuart Slater doing in that cupboard? Jim Kerr in the foothills of Kurdistan, 45 degrees out here. Good times are coming, troops. It's great to hear from you, Jim. And Danny Boy couldn't care less about Spurs Orange. I'm a Celtic fan, end off. Listen, I'm kind of there myself. I think when he left, I said, good luck to him. I hope we meet them in the Champions League in a couple of years. That's where I am with Ange Postecoglou. I'm not going to be supporting Spurs. I'm not going to try and get a ticket down to what I still call White Hart Lane. It's not happening. I'm not that interested now. He's gone. Brendan's in.
It's still in the position of White Hart Lane, eh? It's still where White Hart Lane was, except they've turned it round. I'll tell you one thing, Paul. If we're still doing the Celtic State of Mind nights in 10 years' time, and you get Angelos Postecoglou, it will sell it. That because he's that type of guy.
We will still be doing them in 10 years' time, by the way. Ernest Mostly, I love that avatar. That is tremendous. Saudi Arabia is morally bereft. 10 million in his skyrocket makes most, and certainly Jota, forget his social conscience. Yes, it does. And that shows you, and there's a great, linking back into Strack, there's a great clip on Gordon Strachan talking about that, Kev, how football teams, football clubs and fans accept almost anything into their football club, don't they? And it's very unfortunate indeed. Listen, a player who didn't wear that jersey, Kev, he had left a couple of seasons before, was Roy Aitken, but Roy Aitken is in fact the latest in a long line of Celtic legends to join us live on stage. Favourite memory of Roy Aitken, Kev? The Bear?
Charging the 85 Cup final to cross the ball for Frank McGarvey. Him being a real leader during the centenary season as well, him and McStay, especially Paul, and also the 89 Cup final when we're a minute in injury time and he humps the ball right into the Celtic end when we've got a free kick down at the corner flag. They holding the ball in the corner. I think he actually pushes away Peter Grant and go, no, we're not holding the ball, and he just launches it right into the Celtic end.
That's fantastic. To stop the treble.
He stole the shy that day.
They're still going on about it. Still going on about it. Great. What a career. At the time that he makes his debut, he's the youngest player ever to play for Celtic. He's 16 years of age. He plays under Jock Stein. He plays in the 1977 double-winning campaign in the Scottish Cup final, 1-0 against Rangers. He's playing in that game, a young guy at that point. He plays in 10 men, winning the league, Kev. He plays in the 85, the 100th Scottish Cup final, the centenary double. He does the lot. And we have him on stage. He doesn't do this very often, but he will be joining the Celtic State of Mind. If you want to come along, tickets are now on sale, and the ticket link is underneath this video. He's a player of my youth. That centenary season, I need to check, Kev. I think he was like 28-year-old at that stage.
He was, aye. When he left Celtic, he was only 30.
Mm-hmm.
Like when he left 2 years later, he was only 30.
Do you know Liam Brady tried to sign him back?
Yes, to bring him back? I've heard that story now, yes.
Try to bring him back. Listen, it's an absolute pleasure to rejoin Kevin Graham on A Celtic State of Mind. It was us two at that kitchen table who did episode 1. So every time we join you on a Monday, it's a pleasure. Like and subscribe. So give us a thumbs up on the YouTube. Subscribe to the channel if you want to make a comment, as many of you have done today. And Kevin mentioned the blog earlier. We are active on Acsom.net. If you want to read our musings, get over there, where you will find loads of new content, free charge, and at this moment in time, advert free as well, Kev. So get on it. It's not clickbait. There's long form. I'm currently looking through an 11-pager from Kevin, so it's not just 140 words. It's a lot more than that as well, Kev. So thanks for contributing. Get on it. And thank you all for your support, because on Friday night it was quite incredible to see 355 of you in a room supporting us and watching Gordon Strachan. All that's left for me to say, Kevin Graham, thank you for joining me on A Celtic State of Mind.
Cheers, lads. Cheerio.